Welcome, everybody, to the next episode of Studio Spotlight 9. So, late in the year, last year, we're all kind of sitting in this COVID world that we have. And I kept thinking to myself, what is there that I can do to help other people get something important to them kind of out there to the world? Because we're just not going around people as much anymore. I mean, we're starting to build up again, but you'll understand what I'm saying. And that's kind of when I do things to make myself accountable to me. And I say things like I'll post stuff, not just to be like, oh, this is what I'm working on. It's more like, this is what I'm doing. Hold me accountable for what I'm doing. And I know one of the people that noticed when I said, hey, I'm going to be trying to start something towards the beginning of the year was my friend Robert here. And from my understanding, he was intrigued when he saw kind of what I was saying. I didn't say much beyond,
Nope.
I'm starting something new. This is going to be new. This is not something that's your normal, average advertisement thing. This is different. This is Studio Spotlight 9. And, well, it didn't happen right at the first of the year. We kept pushing through it. And on February the 8th, we started. We're still going. And this is a place for people to feature what they're working on, what they're doing, some of the coaching or programs or things that they're doing that are there to help others. And from here in this past week, I talked to Robert, and I'm super intrigued by this book that he's writing. Robert, how are you?
I'm well, Philip. Thank you
Awesome.
for introducing me. Yes.
Oh, you're very welcome. So I've read you sent me the first little bits of your book, which
Yeah.
honestly makes me want to see the rest when it's completed. So what was
Thank you.
kind of I don't know, I might use a fancy word here that some people might not quite understand. What was the impetus for your book? Like, what made you want really to do that? Because I know you want to be there to help others, but what was it that made
Yes.
that kind of happen?
Well, I appreciate you asking that question, even if it was in a unique way of asking it. There was a specific moment that really did cause me to look deep into writing. So one of the things that I did not expect was in my mid 50s to have an autism diagnosis, because I thought, well, who wants to admit to a mental disorder, which legally it is? And so I was tested at the University of Utah, and it came back that I was on the spectrum, and I believe it's ASD, autism spectrum disorder. Well, I went there to have myself tested really to save my marriage. I felt like I needed to do whatever I needed to do to save my marriage, and so I went to be tested. Well, after the test came back and said, well, yes, you are on the spectrum, I went back to the people at the University of Utah to talk to one of the top autism specialists at the time, Dr. Julia Connolly, and I asked her, I would like to have my diagnosis rescinded. I do not have autism. And she said, well, we'll see. So I started talking to her, and she asked some questions to me. And well, 4 years later, I was still talking to her once a week, an hour, 1 hour each week for 4 years. And she came back and she says, Robert, she says, I've never known anybody who've gone through what you've experienced. She says, you need to write a book. You have some very interesting stories. Well, there was a problem with that suggestion. I liked it. The problem was I was pretty illiterate. I didn't really know how to read very well. I've only read 2 books in my life. Once in 7th grade, and about 20 years later, I read another book that caught my interest. And so I was a little bit concerned about writing a book when I hardly knew how to read myself, let alone punctuate or enunciate words. It was all very difficult to me. So she said, and calming my nerves of even thinking about writing a book, she said, that's okay. She says, that's what editors are for. So I decided, okay, I will write. And my writing skills really came down to writing a sentence, and I'd give it to a friend of mine, and my friend said, I'd say to my friend, what do you think? I was so excited that I wrote a sentence. And she says, well, it's a nice bullet point sentence. She says, maybe you need to add some to that. So I said, okay. I went back and wrote a paragraph. And she came back and she said, oh, that's a nice bullet point paragraph. She says, where are your feelings? And I said, well, they were beat out of me. I said, I don't have any feelings. And she says, well, you need to go back and think about it then. And I did. I didn't realize that as I started writing, how I needed to tap into something that was really hurtful. The title of my book will be Stop Your Crying, or I'll Give You Something to Cry About. I used to cry at one point in time, and then Mother would beat me for doing things that I didn't do. Plus, I was a mute. I didn't talk till I was nearly 5 years old. And so I couldn't defend myself. Eventually had to teach myself how to talk if I was going to survive this relationship or this life. So I did. Well, I had to reach deep inside of me to start writing, and I recognized that. And my autism therapist, she said, I can't believe the way you write. And it gave me the encouragement that I needed. And I think she saw that in me, that I didn't see that in myself. So I started writing, and it's taken me 2.5 years to write a memoir, the first 25 years. And it wasn't just about my life. There were interesting stories. I had a relationship with Mother. I loved her then. I love her today. She's been gone since '06, and maybe it makes it easier with her being gone, because now I can build a relationship with her that I couldn't have growing up. So the more I wrote, the more feelings, and I'd look back and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe what I've gone through. Even I had lived in denial that these experiences in my life were so traumatic. Well, 33 chapters later and 115,000 words, I completed the book in its rough draft back in December. And so this goes back to Philip. He had this program of something, I didn't know what it was. And I guess I'm grateful to be able to hold Philip accountable, because it gave me the opportunity to talk a little bit about the book, but more importantly is to relate to people who've gone through mental, psychological, physical, emotional abuse. And in my case, it was sexual abuse from a neighbor, and succeed in life. I guess one part I could share in a quick moment was Mother, even before I could talk, Mother would stand in front of other people with me at her side and say, I should have never had him. I should have left him in the cart at the department store when I had the chance, or given him away, or drowned him in the tub when I had the chance. And Mother always added that last part, and she would say, ooh, that really makes him angry. Mother knew I wasn't retarded because that's what I was accused of being growing up because of my inability to talk. So once I realized Mother was baiting me, I stopped getting mad. What I had to do if I was going to survive is I had to turn her negative words into positive. Well, her beatings, her negative words, negative outcomes, I started recognizing that throughout my life, there were people who would take a negative situation and they'll turn it into a positive situation. I had to. It was a way for me to survive. Whether autism had a part of that or not, at the time, I didn't know. I eventually came to realize that it had. It kept me in a state of innocence to where I wasn't aware of the situation as dire as it really was. So I learned to take negative and turn it into positive in almost every aspect of my life. Even the sexual abuse, I turned that into a positive. It wasn't easy. What was easy was that I could just do it. It was an automatic reaction inside of me to turn this into positive. What I learned later on in life is that sometimes people take positive and turn it into negative. I just couldn't comprehend that. I think I can give one quick example. I was watching a Tony Robbins seminar, and being that it's virtual, they would have all these scrolls come up at the bottom of the screen, and I would see these comments like, "I'm not good enough," I can't do that, and many others. And I turned to my friend who had invited me and I said, "Lee, do people really talk like that about themselves?" And he goes, "That's the real world, Robert. They do." And I was just dumbfounded. I had no idea that people would say these things about themselves because of my experiences in my life. And so I realized how people will take a positive and turn it into a negative. And that's what I hope my book will do, is that they'll take a very negative experience that they've had in their life that they don't want to talk about. Some of my chapters, one chapter in particular, I call it The Mask of Humor, and it's really dedicated after Robin Williams. Robin was one of the funniest men in the comedian industry, and he had a pain he was covering up, and he covered it up through humor. And I recognized that moment how I had created humor in my life. Things had gotten so bad that I actually wanted to commit suicide when I was 10 years old. I'd made some very lifelong decisions, if I was going to live, that I needed to follow through with. We'll talk about that another time, but it was I failed to win over Mother's love. Well, and that's I wanted to commit suicide. And I handed my brother a knife to stab me to death. And I described this in my book, and how when I handed him the knife, he laughed at me. And I was so devastated that he would just laugh. And I felt so alone and isolated. But I had to take that negative experience and turn it into a positive. Even if I had to mask that positivity through humor, I started finding funny things about Mother that were humorous. It helped me get through my childhood. But I'm going to fast forward for a moment, because my son, Parker, went into the mentoring business. And one of the things that has learned to do is to become a very good mentor. And I had gone to him and I said, "Well, what kind of mentor are you, Parker?" I says, because the reason I asked that question is, I don't want you to be a placebo mentor. And he said, "Do you mean a placebo?" I said, "What's a placebo?" And he said, well, somebody who creates an artificial world for themselves. And I thought, well, I did that growing up, so maybe. So I decided, I said, no, I said, well, I'll go back later on and I'll figure out that word. I'll look it up, placebo. And I says, well, he says, well, what are you talking about? I says, well, see, I've been doing some studying and realized that when a doctor will do a blind test, they'll give a patient a placebo, which is usually in most part a sugar pill, and anywhere from 15% on the low to 72% on the high, that patient will get better. Well, that just fascinated me. It averages out around 28%. And I said, so you can be a mentor and offer some very positive statements with about a 30% success rate. I said, you're leaving a lot of information on the table, but you could do a lot more if you get down to the depths and the roots of who you are. And once you get to the roots of who you are and understand how and why, what makes you tick, and make decisions that you decide, I'll bet you that you will become a much better mentor, and you will not be in that placebo category, because I started recognizing how many people want to be mentors. It just fascinated me, and I think it's innate in us that we want to help people. So I thought, well, I'll go back and look at that word, which I did, placebo, and I recognized that it wasn't a word. And so I immediately texted him back and said, don't use that word. It's not even a word. If you start using that word, people will think you're illiterate. So don't use the word placebo. It's placebo. Well, he took that as in stride, but okay. Well, I came back to him. I did some more studying, and I came back to him because I found a new word. And I'll ask you, Philip, have you ever heard the word nocebo?
So nocebo, I know you and I talked about this the other day, and I had not heard of it at all. Like, you were the first person that had ever mentioned it to me, and I was just like, really? It's such a interesting thing that I think you're definitely going to want to share here with everybody else.
Well, yes, I thank you, because the word nocebo is almost the opposite of a placebo. So this is the best way I can explain it. So a construction worker jumps off of about a 6-foot platform, jumps on to the ground. What he doesn't see when he jumps off of that ledge is that there's a nail in a piece of wood, and that nail goes through his foot, through the shoe and through his foot. And he starts screaming in pain and agony that what had just happened. And when I heard that first time, even now, I get this chill down my spine that goes all the way down to the back of my heel. It's like, oh my gosh, I've stepped on a nail before. I know what that's like. And it just sent chills to me down my body. And so they rushed him to the hospital. They knew with a nail through his foot that they had to remove that nail, remove the foot, and repair the damage that was his foot, and remove the shoe. So they did. All the while he's screaming in agony and pain. Well, once they removed it and they removed his shoe, they found out that the nail had actually gone between his toes. And I thought, wow, isn't that interesting? He created this environment that didn't exist, almost similar to what my son was saying, in creating an environment that didn't exist. And so I became really fascinated by that word nocebo, and how we, doctors, for example, they cover their backside. They have to explain, say, an operation or what that you may have experienced. They have to cover their backside to say, well, you may experience this, or it may not work, or you have a X amount % chance of dying.
Right.
Well, they have to do that. The problem is it sets a precedence in your head that that failure could happen or will happen.
Absolutely.
And so, yes, a nocebo can be just as detrimental to a person if they're not careful. You mentioned when we talked the other day
Yeah,
that you had some operations.
absolutely. And I can totally relate with this nocebo that you're talking about here, because like I'm just thinking in my head right now about, I was in the hospital after I had my transplant surgery. I was there
Mhm.
for a month. It was essentially like 30 days I was in there because there were complications with things not even related to the actual transplant itself, that happened. And
Yeah.
I mean, it sucked while I was in there, don't get me wrong. But now I think about it, I'm like, okay, it was good. I spent it was 30 days in there. But I think about it, and like you think about being in the hospital, you have the people that walk around, they're pushing their carts. You can kind of hear like the wheels going down the hallway, right? To draw
Right.
blood, right? And me having had kidney problems and been on dialysis, I have a fistula right here in my arm. So this arm is a do not draw blood from here. It could cause major, major issues if you tried, because then you can't really get the blood flow to stop. So we're kind of, this arm is kind of where we have to go. And I just remember hearing like that cart coming down the hallway. And I'm like, oh no, not this again. Because I know they're coming for me. I mean, after a transplant, you're getting your blood drawn 2, 3 times a day, at that
Wow.
point in the hospital.
Wow.
And man, I can just think back on it, thinking about how bad it felt, like getting just, and the needles they draw blood with, they're like these little teeny things, they're not these big, huge needles anymore. They're little teeny needles. And I remember it hurting so bad. But then realistically, I think about it. Now I'm at the point where I seriously get my blood drawn once a month, you know, just because you have to
Right.
check to make sure everything's normal and stable and how it's supposed to be. It doesn't bother me. I go in there and it's just like, oh, pull up my sleeve. Here's my arm.
There you go.
It's like I don't even react. It's the exact same thing though. Shouldn't I
Mhm.
be screaming in pain from this like I was prior? But I wasn't. But I don't.
Yes, and I think that's a perfect example that when we hear something, or we don't even have to hear it. What we can do is hear it from somebody else that you're not good enough.
I
It's really a detrimental. It's just like stop your crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. Well, I took that as a nocebo. I created this environment that, well, I'm going to stop crying. Now, it was an artificial environment. I could have still kept crying, but I also connected that to like the Tony Robbins seminar on how people write these in the script that they are not good enough. And I thought that's really a nocebo. They can be if they could just switch that, even if they switch that around to a placebo, and it really goes back to that saying of taking a negative situation, because things happen in our life, just
of
a
course.
kidney transplant or whatnot, things happen, and you can take that as a negative and turn it into a positive, or you can take it as a positive and turn it into a negative. I think I said that right,
Yeah.
but yeah, and so that's really what the message I wanted to get across with my son, with with him being a mentor or in his life, and even with me writing the book, is to recognize that when I get myself to a point of being able to promote my book, I believe it'll be towards the end of this year where I'll have it completed. We're working with an editor to go through the chapters. One of the things that makes it slow is that I think in riddles, and I have to de-riddle things that go through my head in order for it to make sense for the reader. Unfortunately, I have somebody who's been in the um, field, who knows and understands psychology, and was a teacher herself, and so when we started this, I needed to make sure that it made sense and I just have to trust that what she tells me, because I don't know what some of these words are, that like an adjective or pronouns and stuff that you would have to put in to make this sentence. Now, that may be a nocebo myself, so I have to catch myself when I'm in an environment that stories that I'm telling me that aren't true. Uh, I can learn. It may be true that I don't know, but I can learn what a nocebo, what is that story I'm telling myself, and that's really the message that I wanted to get across to through my book, but also to my son about creating a nocebo is telling ourselves the negative side of failure. And I recognize that when at 16 years old, I was going to go into the lawn business, and I told my neighbor, I'm going into the lawn business. I'm going to make a lot of money cutting lawns. And she said, well, everyone will be out cutting lawns and their dog, and you'll never make any money. And it meant nothing to me. I absolutely dismissed it. I did not have the attitude, I'll show you. First of all, I'm only 15 years old.
Right.
In the space of innocence that I believe my mind was in and still is, there was no, I can't do that. It's like, no, I dismissed what she said. Years later, there was a man that I met, and I said, his name was Richard Olson, and I said, one day I'm going to buy land. And he got right into my face, and he says, talk's cheap. You'll never buy land. And I dismissed that. And I really credit back to Mother telling me so many times. She actually told me I should have never had you till I was 42 years old. But by then, I had success principles already put together in my head. Mother did not have the control that she wanted to have over me. So that's a kind of a summary of the book, but it's and my experiences with life, and I'm just very grateful for this opportunity to share a small part of my experiences and to be able to get to know you, Philip, and more as we hopefully you'll have me back on again. So that's my time to say stop.
Oh man, I've loved having you on here, and I know I want to have you back on here. I know at least when your book is done, we got to have you back on here because I know people are going to want to know about it. Like I already know sitting here thinking about it, I'm like, man, I want like the completed book. Like, and I know you're still working on it, so I'm not, trying to put pressure on you. You do it as you do it.
Yeah.
And I'll be waiting because I know I'm gonna want to read it. I know, and
Thank you.
that's saying something because kind of like you brought up earlier, you've read like you said like 2 books at that point, like over the course of your life. You'd read one when you were in school and then one significantly later. Like I could honestly sit here and say up until, I mean, it was 2019, 2020, kind of as I'm recovering from all these surgeries and all this business that I've had to happen. That's probably the first time I'd read anything since I was in high school.
Oh, wow.
And even then it was like, if it was semi interesting, I might read it when I was in high school. If it was other things where I'd read the first chapter and I would go, oh, this is terrible, I was not going to read it. Even if the teacher was like, we're going to have a test, I was like, I'll get the answers from somebody else.
There you go. I can relate to that.
I had a way around it and it worked out. But so me saying it's a book and I want to read it is still pretty new to me. I haven't done a whole ton of that up until the last year. And even then, let's say in comparison to what other people, the amount of things other people might be reading, I'm not even close. No,
Sure.
But I am super excited to read yours when it comes out.
Well, I appreciate that. Eventually, what will happen you'll run across the screen as at the end is for people to go to learntocryagain@gmail.com will be a link to that for people to ask questions, and so and that'll be learntocryagain@gmail.com. So I appreciate this opportunity.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so
I'm
much.
going to have that email posted for everybody to see and do with, what they're going to do with it.
Absolutely.
It's been my pleasure to have you on. I look forward to speaking with you again because
Thank you.
I'm super intrigued by the book you're writing, and you are an incredible storyteller. Just sitting here telling stories you're amazing.
Well, I appreciate that. I think because it comes from the heart,
Yep.
and that's where it becomes most meaningful. So yeah, thank you so much, Philip.
You're welcome. Okay, so this has been my friend Robert. He's writing his freaking incredible book that I can't wait to read because secret, I've got to read a little bit of the beginning and it's awesome. So I seriously encourage everybody when this is available to read it. Like, it's awesome. I've loved it so far. Thank you for being here.
Thank
All
you.
right, everybody. Thank you for having watched Studio Spotlight 9. We definitely have future guests coming up, and they're all awesome and incredible. And I mean, I know one of those guests is going to be you, my friend. So
thank you.
We will see you again. All right, everybody.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, Philip.
All right.
Bye-bye.
See you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, Robert.
Oh, that's so cute.